Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to continue on in Unit 6, Industrial and Economic Development. And today what we're going to be looking at is we're going to look at just a very brief discussion on industrialization and some of the changes that have taken place in industrialization, and very briefly talk about some of the elements that are important to it and some of the social changes that take place as a result. Now, really, if you think about it, we've been discussing industrialization almost throughout the entire unit because with the Industrial Revolution, you get all these different types of changes that start to take place in the world. You get social changes with population, you get migration changes in regards to people moving from rural to urban settings. You get economic changes as economic diversification begins to become greater and people get different types of jobs. Economic growth is incredibly great. So you think about it, really the class you could say almost starts with the Industrial Revolution, because that's where a lot of these modern processes that are part of our world begin, and they don't really begin until the Industrial Revolution. So anyway, when we talk about industrialization, what we're referring to is the increased manufacturing of products, or of finished products. So really, we're talking about machines being used in order to do the work of industrial processing, or the manufacturing of products. So we're moving from a time where you either had handmade goods or you had very simple machines making goods to automated processes for industrial production. And so some of the things that are going to come as a result of that is we're going to begin to see a decline in primary economic activities. And when I say decline in primary economic activities, I'm not necessarily saying that primary economic activities become less important, but a lot of those processes become automated through the use of machines, just like we saw in the second agricultural revolution. You saw a lot of machines being used in agricultural production, so you didn't need as many people. And so because people started losing their jobs in England as a result of the enclosure movement, and as well as machines taking over their jobs and becoming more efficient, people started looking for new jobs. And a lot of these things are kind of working in concert together. It's not like you have one process happen, then another process has another process. It's almost like this natural move begins to occur as people begin to move into cities and begin looking for jobs as factories begin to develop, specifically in England. And so what begins to happen is, as a result of the decline in primary economic activities, mainly agricultural economic activities, people begin to move from rural areas into urban areas. And of course, they're moving to those urban areas looking for jobs, and they're going to find their jobs in the factories that are starting to develop as a result of industrialization. But before we move on, it's now time to take part in a quiz ferret. Our dear furry friend has popped his head out of the ground and he has a question for us. So this is going to come from our previous video. And since we're talking about industrialization, he finds it entirely appropriate to ask us about which economic sector is industry a part of. So pause the video for just a second. The answer to that is the secondary economic sector. So we go from primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quinary. So hopefully you can discuss the different elements of each of those. That would be very important to remember. So when we talk about the Industrial Revolution itself, the Industrial Revolution starts, roughly I always use 1750 as a kind of historical date, but 1760, 1750, somewhere in there. But what we're seeing is the increased use of machine power in order to manufacture products. Now, an important element to industrialization and the Industrial Revolution was the use of the engine. With the engine, what we have is the ability to drive these large machines, and we also have the free placement of factories, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But it's the development of the steam engine that allows for the building and the development of these large factories that are going to be responsible for the mass production of these goods. So again, these engines are going to be steam engines at the beginning, and they are going to be powered by coal and water. Essentially the coal is used to create fire, and then the engines have water in them, and the water develops pressure, and it drives the pistons, which drives the flywheel, which drives the shaft. But anyway, and then it powers the machines. So that's just the basic concept. And again, the development of this engine is what's going to allow for the building of these large factories. And so, without the engine, you really don't have the ability to develop industrialization in the way that it does. And the very first production that becomes a large part of industrialization is going to be textile production. And you think about the importance of textiles and how many people are able to consume textiles, and that's going to be one of the really important parts of industrialization and mass production. Mass production is driven by large quantities of affordable goods. So you need people to be able to afford the goods that you're putting out in the factory. And so, textiles were used by everybody, whether it's for clothing or it's for linens or a variety of other things. Everybody's going to be using textiles, and so you have this focus on textile production is really the very first part of industrial production. So one of the things that when we talk about factories and the geographic location of factories, initially factories were going to be located along moving water. And the reasons for that is the very first factories were actually powered by rivers. And so you had the very large water wheels that were used to drive the machines that were part of the factories. So one of the changes that's going to take place when you have the development of the engine is when you have the engine, essentially you can place the factory wherever you like, because your source of energy, which is the coal, can be moved from place to place. Now what began to happen is, because coal is typically relatively heavy and expensive to transport, the factories were going to be placed near very large coal deposits, and so that kind of helped to fix the location of factories, but it allowed you to get your factories off of rivers. Plus, having rivers that were powerful enough to drive factories was going to be much more difficult. But even still, factories a lot of times tended to focus themselves around rivers because they were major modes of transportation, or along ports. And eventually we're going to see the development of rail as an important element of transportation for industrialization. And so that's the next part there with the Industrial Revolution. Is going to be the development of infrastructure. You have this infrastructure that begins to be built almost not necessarily exclusively, but primarily for the transportation of goods from the factories to the places where they would be exported, either to the ports where they would be exported on boats, or to the markets, the cities, or cities outside of the places where the factories were, so that the goods could get to market and they could be consumed. So some of the new elements of transportation that were developed during this time were obviously trains and railroads. Those would be hugely important, but also the development of canals. Now, canals have been used for hundreds of years, thousands of years, but now we begin to see an increased effort to build larger canals that took ships further inland, because transporting goods on boat is the fastest and cheapest method of transportation. So the longer you can keep goods on the boat, the cheaper the transportation of the goods are going to be. So that's going to be a really important element of development. And again, all this revolves around the transportation of the finished product so that it could then be brought to market. Another element in that is the transportation of the raw material to the factory. But again, really a lot of this infrastructural development occurs so that the goods can make their way from the factory to the market, because without the selling of the good, really you don't have the expansion of industrialization, you don't have the expansion of the economy and things along those lines. One of the next really important developments isn't really going to come until later. Now, you could look at the different elements in each of the types of factories, especially in textile production, and you look at the different machines that were used, but really the next important element in industrial production is going to be the assembly line production. Developed in the 1920s, and a lot of people say that Henry Ford didn't necessarily create the assembly line production. I guess they might be right, but he kind of perfects the system, and he uses this this conveyor belt situation where things are the pieces to the puzzle are constantly moving, and they're moving down the assembly line, and essentially you have a large building, and things move from one end of the building to the next, and by the time the by the time you get to the end of the assembly line, you have the finished product. So you start with all the pieces, and at the very end of the production line, you see the finished product. And you can kind of see that right here with the production of these cars here. You see further down the line, there's less elements to the car, but by the time they get closer up, you have pretty much all the pieces of the car put together. So you have the assembly line production, which makes production much more efficient. He also, and again, Eli Whitney typically is credited with the development of interchangeable parts, and I've seen it credited even further back. But the idea of interchangeable parts, the mass production of the pieces that are going to be a part of the production process, so that if something happens to break down, it's an easy and it's a quick fix. Like you go to the store and you can find, standard screws and nails and bolts and nuts and those types of things. So it's the exact same concept, so that you have an oversupply of some of those parts, so that you can fix the parts that break, and after things roll off the assembly line, once you own them, you can fix them. If the machine breaks in the factory, it also can be fixed relatively cheaply and quickly and easily. And with this, again, we have the development of mass production of products. And again, industrialization is driven by mass production, and the goods that are coming off the line have to be affordable. And so, we're not talking about the mass production of very expensive goods, but things that are affordable to the majority of society. So along with this, you have to have the growth and development of a large middle class, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. Some other really important elements of assembly line production is going to be what's called the division of labor. Basically what happens within the factory, each person is assigned a specific task. So instead of one person being knowledgeable about all parts of car production, each person is knowledgeable about one element of car production. So whether it's putting on the wheel, whether it's putting in the glass for the windshield, whether it's putting on the hood of the car, whether it's putting on a side panel of the car. So basically what you do is you break down all the elements of the production line, and what I coin, I don't know if I coined the term or not, but what I call the de-skillification of labor. And again, obviously that's not a term, but the idea is you take labor that at one point in time was highly skilled and need lots of training for, and you break that skill down so that training doesn't take as long, but also it provides for cheaper labor. Okay, that's really important when it comes to industrialization, because the cheaper the labor is, the cheaper the production costs are going to be. And if I can break the task down so simply that essentially it's just one person doing one thing all day long, and it's a repetitive task, it doesn't take a whole lot of brain power, it doesn't take a whole lot of training to be able to get that process, then I can pay that person a lot less, and also that person's a lot more easily replaceable if the time ever comes that I need to replace that person. Industrial processes take some training, they take some skill, but the idea there is you break down the skill so that the labor is not necessarily as expensive as it was at one time. Now, we're about to run out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and end the video right here, but I'll make an additional video where I talk about some new industrial concepts that we see in the world that we're currently living in, that are a part of kind of the new global economic system. We'll talk about the international division of labor as well as just-in-time production. But again, I'll make a video that moves along with this one, and then we'll talk about those two elements or concepts. So I hope you found that to be helpful, and I hope to see you next time.